Welcome everybody to part 8 of our series, Major Minor. And I am so glad you are joining with us on today. Come on, whether you're watching from the house, you're on vacation somewhere, or wherever it may find you. Maybe today's your first time. You've been joining us for a long time. I'm so grateful that you're here today because I believe that today I have a word from God for us in this moment of time as we study what is literally the next minor prophet that we get to. You see, we're in this series all summer called Major Minor, where what we're doing is walking through some often overlooked and undiscussed aspects and portions of the scripture, a collection of works at the end of the Old Testament known as the minor prophets. These minor prophets are powerful in their writing. They're called minor not because they're insignificant, but because they're short. See, we've been saying this throughout the series just to help our mind understand some of the verbiage sometimes that's put on the scriptures. The major prophets are really just long. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they were wordy. Ezekiel, he got some stuff to say. These minor prophets, though, all 12 of them at the end of the Old Testament, are minor in their length. But what we've been learning every single week, come on, what we learned from Hosea and Amos and Micah and Nahum, come on, everyone that we've studied, is that they're major in their impact. And that reality continues today as we study the profound works, the profound writing, the profound frustrations of a man named Habakkuk. There are two main reasons people get frustrated at God. People get frustrated at God because of what they think he did or because of what they believe he allowed. So many times you'll interact with people, maybe even you'll hear yourself say, man, God, why did you let this happen? God, why did you do this thing? God, why did you do this? People attribute to God things that shouldn't be attributed to God. They think he did something that he didn't do, but because they think he did it, they get frustrated at him. Or people love to say this, if I were God, then I would. Come on, if I were God, then they would be healed. If I were God, then nobody would die. Nobody would be sick. Nobody would have lack. If I were God, I would navigate it. How could God allow this? If I were God, I would stop that. If you've ever thought you would handle a situation different than, better than God, Habakkuk is for you. Let me help us dive ourselves into Habakkuk today before we begin to unpack this work. Although, like we've been encouraging throughout this whole series, and many of you have done, I've had people email me, text me, I've had people tell me face to face that after every time they hear one of these sermons, they are going back on their own and reading these minor prophets, whether through the whole week or in one sitting. Again, they're short in length. You can do this. I will tell you on today, if you haven't done that yet, you need to read the book of Habakkuk, because Habakkuk reads. It's only 3 chapters, but it reads like a manifesto on our world today. See, Habakkuk was a prophet in the southern portion of Israel, Judah as many know it, at the end of Judah's existence. See, Israel was a united kingdom, and then after Solomon, they divided into a northern and southern kingdom. By the time Habakkuk comes around, the northern kingdom has been taken over and it is no more. The southern kingdom is hanging on for its existence by mere threads. And this is the day and time that Habakkuk is alive and ministering. This is the moment that the prophet Habakkuk has something to do, but he's watching this nation that he's a part of literally come unravel. He's watching it, even though it had had some seasons and he had heard some stories of how they honored God for a time. Right now, they don't honor God. Right now, they have lost their way and chaos is going on around them. What's really interesting about the book of Habakkuk, if you've been tracking with us through this series or will continue to track with us from here going forward, is you'll find many of the prophets are speaking correction and condemnation to Israel, whether the northern or the southern kingdom. That's not Habakkuk's work. Many of the prophets are saying, this is what God says to you, to people. That's not what Habakkuk does. Habakkuk actually spends his time complaining to God, because Habakkuk has this struggle in his present day. He's speaking to God about what he sees, and he's telling God that I'm struggling believing that you are good because of everything I see going on in my world. I think this is really important for us to digest on today. Come on, you came to church in the summer, you're tuning in, you're listening to the podcast, watching this on YouTube in the summer. I think this is so significant for us to digest right here, right now, today, because you know what? Our world is wild, y'all. Like, it's wild out there. When you open up Twitter, turn on the news, or if you're still one of those who grab a paper newspaper and you start to read about what's happening in our city, in our country, in our world, it is very easy to feel what Habakkuk felt. Because every time we tune into what is going on in the world, we find out about another mass shooting at a grocery store, or at a school, or even at just a holiday parade. Every time we open up the news to find out what's going on, we read and ingest more political alienation, not division. Division was a long time ago. Division speaks to difference of thought. We have alienation now, where if I think that you think differently than me, if I think that you think you are for something I am against, or you are for someone that I am against, or I am for someone you're against, we are not divided in our politics. We alienate ourselves to one another and find echo chambers that speak to our camp. That's what our world is. Every time we turn on the news, we hear about war going on in Ukraine right now. And though it may be on the other side of the world to many of us, it is a very present traumatic reality for millions of people in our world right now. Every time we walk out the door of our house, we are met with the news that inflation is on the rise. Come on, anybody else like me, you scared to drive by gas stations? Because every time you drive by, the gas be like 10 cents higher. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was cheaper this morning. What happened? Not to mention, yo, it's just hot outside. You know what I'm saying? And ain't nobody happy. Everybody a little more grumpy when it's hot outside, you know? This is the nature of our world right here and right now. And I think the words of Habakkuk speak so directly to it. If maybe you're like him, and when you look out the window into your world, when you look out the window into your neighborhood, when you start to take a glance at what's going on in the world, or in the country, or in our city, you start to look at it and you wonder, God, what is going on? You say that you're good, but all that I see is not good. You say that you're present, but all that I see seems like you left. God, what am I supposed to do? That is what Habakkuk feels and communicates. Listen to his articulation from the very beginning of the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter 1, starting in verse 2, reading to verse 4. Listen to the prayer, the cry, but really the complaint from Habakkuk. He says, how long, Lord, must I call for help and you do not listen, or cry out to you about violence and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. Some of y'all think I read a prayer from the New York Times or the USA Today or the Daily Memphian from today. Nope. This is Habakkuk thousands of years ago, crying out to God because of what he saw in his world. Maybe for those of you who think the Bible is irrelevant, maybe for those of you who maybe you're sitting there watching this with someone and you have in your mind that the Bible does not understand what's going on in our world today. Maybe you could just lean into the words of Habakkuk and recognize that what he saw in his world looks a lot like what you probably see in your world. Come on, you look out the window and it feels like, why does injustice seem to be everywhere? Why do good people get taken advantage of and bad people seem to prosper? Where are you, God? That's what he said. See, I believe this is a whole world for today. Habakkuk gets to the end of this few verses that he even said here and said, no one follows, and the law is ineffective. And he's not talking about the law, the constitution of the day. He's not talking about the legal parameters of the day. He's literally talking about the law of God, the Torah. He's saying, no one follows this. And so now what happens is anything that we call justice is perverted. See, that's a word for today. Because when you try to legislate morality, you need to expect morality to look mutated. What I need you to see from Habakkuk is that he shows us something on the surface that I do not want you to miss as we begin our exploration on today. That God can handle your complaints. Because that's all Habakkuk does. See, some of you think God only can receive your niceties, only receive your pious affirmations of God, I'm so thankful, and God, you're so good, and blessed be thou name, oh great thou most high. God can handle your complaints. God can handle it when you look at the world and see atrocities going on and say, God, why is this going on? Can I tell you, God can handle it? Because that's all Habakkuk is. In fact, if you read Habakkuk chapter 1, it breaks down very quickly and very simply like this. Habakkuk begins with Habakkuk's first complaint. He literally, this is what we just read, this is the first complaint. And all he says here is that life is horrible, the leaders are corrupt, and nobody follows the law of God. Sound familiar? And then God gives a response to Habakkuk. Are you ready for God's response? Habakkuk was it. God gives a response to Habakkuk's first complaint, and God says, I'm going to use the worst people you know, Habakkuk. I'm going to use them to fix this. That's literally what he says. Read Habakkuk chapter 1 and you will find, depending upon the translation, they will talk about the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. They're the same people. And God says, I have been raising up the worst people you know, the most vile people you know, the wickedest people you know. I have been preparing them to fix this stuff that's going on that you see, Habakkuk, with the worst people you know. And then that leads us to Habakkuk's second complaint, where Habakkuk now gets mad at God because of who God has decided he wants to use. Read it. I'm just trying to make it fast for you. He starts talking about how God is supposed to be holy, and God, you're supposed to be just, and God, you're supposed to be good and right, and yet you're going to use folk worse than us. Like, God, we bad, but they, it's always they, right? They, how are you going to use them? And so this is all that goes on in Habakkuk chapter 1. Habakkuk complains to God. God, the leaders are corrupt. God, the world is corrupt. God, nobody follows your law. And God says, I'm going to use some people that you think are despicable, Habakkuk. And Habakkuk's like, God, I thought you were good. And before Habakkuk even gives God the opportunity to respond to his second complaint, Habakkuk offers some powerful instruction to you and to me. He makes this declaration that I believe that every distraught person needs to set in their heart. Every person who maybe you're frustrated because of the state of what's going on around you. You're frustrated because of the atrocities that have become normalities in our world. You're aggravated by what you see outside the window every single day. Could you set in your heart this declaration from Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1? After complaining to God, receiving God's response, and complaining again, before God even gets to respond the second time, Habakkuk says, I will stand at my guard post and station myself on the lookout tower. I will watch to see what God will say to me and what I should reply about my complaint. Habakkuk is complaining to God. He's not complaining on Facebook. He's not complaining on Twitter. He's not sitting on the front porch talking to anybody that come by and complaining to them. He's complaining to God. But he says, God, as frustrated as I am, as aggravated as I am at what's going on in the world, and quite honestly, God, I'm a little frustrated at you. I will stand my ground. I will do what I am supposed to do, even though I do not see the outcomes around me that I thought I would see if I do what I was supposed to do. Which leads us to you today. Can you be faithful to God when you're confused by God? Somebody needs to write that down in the chat so every person coming by, popping in will see. Can you be faithful to God when you're confused by God? When you're confused by what he's doing in the world or not doing in the world? When you're confused by what it is he seems to allow in your life or not allow in your life? Can you be faithful to God when the actions of God or the inaction of God is confusing to you? Because the truth is, most folk can't. Most people wonder why they're not healed because we prayed for their healing and we believed for their healing and we asked for their healing and they didn't get healed, at least in the way we thought healing was going to look. So we walk away from God and his church and his people altogether. We get so frustrated at what we see in our city, in our country, in our world, in our lives, and we blame God for it. We're so distraught by our family and our finances and our future that we quit trusting God completely. Maybe because we took our complaints to others rather than to God. Maybe because we directed our complaints about God to somebody who was not God. Can you be faithful to God when you're confused by God? Because hear me, friend, and write this down today. Your complaining to question God shouldn't be your cause to quit God. See, some of us think that complaining is quitting, and no, it's not. If you direct it to the right source. Come on, if you up that thing to management where it can actually get handled. The problem is we talking to other people who can't handle nothing. We out here finding people who feel like we feel. I think God should have healed. If God was real, God would heal. That's why I'm going to walk away from him. Listen, your complaining to question God shouldn't be your cause to quit God. And Habakkuk understood this. No, Habakkuk walked this out. Habakkuk lived this because he looked out his window and he saw his world falling apart. He saw good people being taken advantage of and bad people prospering. He saw leaders not doing what leaders should do, not serving, not caring for others, but only in it for their own gain. He saw nobody following the ways of God, and he got so distraught and so frustrated, but yet he stood his ground and said, God, I will be faithful to you even when I'm confused by you. To which God then replies in Habakkuk chapter 2, a few words that may be familiar to some of you. But maybe in this context, you will see the power of these words, not just as some trite leadership axiom, but as the truth of God to people who are distraught by what they see in their world. Listen to Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. Habakkuk says, the Lord answered me. Remember, he said, I'm just going to sit my ground. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do until God shows up and tells me what I'm supposed to do. God answered me. Write down this vision. Clearly inscribe it on tablets so one may easily read it. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It testifies about the end, and it will not lie. Though it delays, wait for it. Somebody say, wait for it. Wait for it, since it will certainly come and not not be late. Look, his ego is inflated. He is without integrity. But the righteous ones will live by his faith. These are the words of God to Habakkuk's second complaint. When Habakkuk complains to God that the methods of God don't seem to look like God in his eyes. Habakkuk is confused about everything that he sees. He's confused about what's going on in his own life, what's confused about what's going on in his own world. When he dreamed of being a prophet, he never dreamed of being a prophet like this. He thought he was going to get a thus saith the Lord to tell the people, but he ain't got no thus saith the Lord. He is just complaining to God because God isn't doing what he thinks God should do. And what God gives him here, Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, are 4 reminders from God for when you're presently confused. And today, I think in our world, I think watching online, I think listening to this podcast, there are so many of us who live our lives confused. You call yourself a Christian. You call yourself a person of faith. You say you're a Jesus follower, but the reality is you're confused. You're confused by what you see. You're confused by what's going on, confused by things that are happening around you. And sometimes you don't know how to rationalize and how to deal with all this that you see and hear and feel. These reminders are for you. Come on, if you're confused about what you see, maybe because your own life hasn't transpired the way you expected it to. You thought you'd be financially independent by now. You thought you'd be married by now. You thought you'd have kids by now. You never expected to be single again. You never expected to be looking for a job again at your age. You never expected. But here you are, confused by what you see. Maybe to a certain extent questioning God for what is going on in your life or in your world. Today I want to give to you these 4 reminders from God for when you're presently confused. The first is this. Would you write this down in your notes? Because I believe you're going to need it. If not today, you're going to need it one day. Cloudy seasons require clear vision. Cloudy seasons require clear vision. Now, you don't need clarity that God is good when everything around you is good, right? Come on, when you got more money than you know what to do with in the bank, you got more friends than you can invite over to the house at one time. Come on, everything feels like it's up and to the right in your world. When everything feels good, you don't need to be reminded of who God is. You don't need to be reminded that he's good. But if you ever find yourself in chaos, if you ever find yourself in confusion and calamity, you better have clarity as to who God is, what he's promised, and what he's called you to. Because otherwise, the cloudiness of your present situation will cause you to get off course because you are not clear on what God has said, because the season is cloudy. The vision needs to be all the clearer. See, God tells Habakkuk to write this vision down. Make it plain and make it clear, because you're going to need it in a season that's coming. What he tells him more specifically as we read on in Habakkuk is that there are going to be a whole lot of moments in your future, Habakkuk, in the future of these people, where people are going to ask, God, are you there? God, do you care? God, why won't you show up? So you need to get clear on who God is right now. Can I tell you something today, friend, that you need to set in your soul? The reason people leave God in difficulty is that they never got clear on who God was to them in prosperity. That maybe should have been a fill in the blank. Like, somebody needs to go ahead and type that down in the chat. Like the reason people leave God in difficulty is they never got clear on who God was to them in prosperity. If you don't get clear on who God is when things are difficult, they'll overwhelm you. Because when things were good, you didn't set out and get intentional about who God is to you. I can't tell you in my life how many times I've seen this exact scenario happen with people. They come into a place of faith when life is falling apart. They got more bills. They've got people that have walked out of their life. their whole life flashed before their eyes because of a health battle, a health scare. Their kids are acting crazy. Their parents are acting crazy, whatever. And they come into church, they come into the house of God to be with the people of God. And through that environment, things start to get good. Not just because if you come to church, everything's going to be good, but something happens and your perspective begins to change. And you begin to see God's faithfulness and things start to turn around. And you see, and then as things get good, they leave. Come on, they get that raise that they had prayed for years. And rather than see it as an opportunity to invest more in the work of God, they say, look at me providing for myself. And they leave. They find a few friends because they came into church and didn't have no friends. And they found friends in the church. Then they decided to leave the church thinking that they could have those friends outside the church. They came in looking for purpose, and they find a little bit of purpose. And God begins to restore some things and heal some things, and then they walk out rather than stand their ground when things are good. And the problem is the next tragedy that's going to come in their life is going to overwhelm them all the more, because now they're going to blame God for it, rather than getting a clear picture of who God is when things are good. If things are good in your life today, can you just take 5 seconds in your kitchen and thank God for it? Come on, if things are good in your life, could you just stand up in your living room and clap your hands and thank God for his goodness in your life? But could you also, while you're standing, make sure you plant your feet in the ground and say, I am going to stay planted in God while things are good. I'm going to be more generous because things are good. Come on, I'm going to give more of my time, more of my energy, more of my finances. Come on, I'm going to love people because I've been healed right now. I'm going to be a friend to people because I remember when I didn't have no friends. I'm going to be that because things are good. See, if you'll get clear on that now, when things do get difficult, you'll stay on track. Because cloudy seasons require clear vision. And the reason people get off track in a cloudy season is they never got clear in a prosperous season. You gotta get clear. Somebody in the chat type, get clear. Get clear. You need to get clear now. The 4 reminders from God for when you're presently confused is that cloudy seasons require clear vision. Number 2 is this. Would you write it down? Current circumstances aren't closed cases. Whatever is going on in your life right now is not all that will ever go on in your life. When things are comfortable, we think things will always be comfortable. But can I tell you something? They won't be. Come on, if you're in a season of prosperity, that's wonderful. This is not a time for you to gloat. This is not a time for you to turn all the attention to how great you are. Because current circumstances aren't closed cases. But hear me, if things are challenging in your world right now, come on, things are confusing in your house, confusing in relationships, confusing at your work, confusing in how you're going to get by through the next couple of months. Listen, if things are confusing, if they're challenging, they won't always be. So hang on. Hang on. Don't let go of the rope. Don't bail out. Hang on. Because current circumstances aren't closed cases. That's what Habakkuk understood. Or he was trying to understand. Because when he looked out his window, he saw very difficult circumstances. He saw challenging situations all around him. He saw people that were supposed to love God not loving God. He saw all of this injustice, all of this difficulty going on. In fact, he writes specifically about them in chapter 2. He calls these the woe oracles. If you read chapter 2 of Habakkuk, you'll see woe, 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 over and over again. And what he's really identifying are 5 things. He talks about unjust economic practices. And he sees this. He sees wealthy people taking advantage of poor people. And he's like, whoa! He sees slave labor taking place. People literally being treated as property. And he's like, whoa! He sees irresponsible leaders, people who are supposed to serve, not serving, but using whatever influence and power they have for their own good. And he says, whoa! He sees the idolatry of self and independence, and I'm gonna do it my way, and I'll have what I have, because whatever is mine, and whatever I think is best for me is what's best for me. And he says, whoa! And he sees an idolatry of power where everybody is hungry and everybody is grasping and grappling for more and more and more power. And he says, whoa! It's to these realities. Do they sound familiar to anybody, or is that just me? It's to these realities that God tells Habakkuk, just because this is what you see right now doesn't mean it's over and done with. It is not finished. See, sometimes we look and we see difficulty around us and we think it will always be difficult around us. It is not finished. Sometimes we look and we see injustice, and it's always been unjust. It's always been difficult. This has always been a bad school. This has always been a tough neighborhood. This has always been, and we think that's the way it will always be. Current circumstances aren't closed cases. God tells Habakkuk, it is not finished. And I believe God sent me to tell you today, in your life, in your city, in your neighborhood, in our world, that it is not finished. If it's bad, it's bad. But guess what? It's not done, because current circumstances aren't closed cases. He's not finished with you. He's not finished with what he's doing in the world. And you may not understand it right now. But somebody in that chat type, it is not finished. If you're presently confused, God has reminders for you. Cloudy seasons require clear vision. That current circumstances aren't closed cases. And number 3, would you write this down? That clear delays are worth waiting. See, there's a lot of frustration with Habakkuk because he hear God saying about stuff he's gonna do, but like Habakkuk's like, it'd be cool if you did that right now. There's a disconnect on time. But see, I think for many of us, this is where we get frustrated with God. God, you can heal them right now. Why don't you heal them right now? And God says, I will heal them, but maybe I'm going to heal them on the other side. I will provide, but maybe I'm going to provide in a way you didn't expect. Or maybe I'm going to provide for you by giving you something you didn't even know you needed. You thought you needed that, but what you really need is this. See, it's late to you, but it's never late to God. Old folk used to say, he never gonna show up early, but it'll always be right on time. And what you need for this waiting is faith. See, faith is the fuel for the waiting. Isn't that what God told Habakkuk in Habakkuk chapter 2? He said, wait for it, since it will certainly come. And he even made sure he knew. He says, it will not be late. Habakkuk, this didn't register with him. Because you get to the beginning of chapter 3 after all these woe oracles, and Habakkuk starts calling out to God. And he says, God, I want you to do all this stuff that you're going to do, but I want you to do it now. Do it now. Do it now. Does that sound like your prayer? Do it now. Do it now. Not next week, not next month. Now. You're on time. Do it now. And God's like, let me tell you about how powerful I am, Habakkuk. That's what he does. And let me tell you about how there are bad rulers, he calls them pharaohs, that I'm going to annihilate on your behalf. But God says, I got you later. I got you later. See, it's Peter who would write in the New Testament that with God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. That is not some math formula for you to put into your calculator to figure out how long things are. Because in the way that Peter was writing, to say something was 1,000 meant it was a multitude, so many to count. It was an incalculable amount. So to say what Peter said another way for us, he said, with God, a day is like an amount of time that you can't even calculate. And with God, an amount of time that you can't even calculate is like a day. In other words, God is outside of, inside of, and beyond your time. He is not early. He is not late. He is always right on time. So friend, Don't say it's late when God says it's later. See, some of you are calling provision late, and God said, no, I'm going to provide. It's just going to be later. Because there's something in this season I want to develop faith in you for. Some of you, you're calling it late because they hadn't shown up. You're calling it late because you're still struggling. You're calling it late because you're still hurting. And God says, it's not late, it's just later. Because clear delays are worth waiting. That's why God says, wait for it. It's going to come. And it will not be late. And then he gives the fourth and final reminder for situations when you're presently confused. And he says this. Would you write this down? That choosing faith precedes being righteous. Choosing faith precedes, it comes before being righteous. The very last words from verse 4 of chapter 2, Habakkuk says, the righteous one will live by his faith. I did not say choose to be righteous, but choose faith. See, some people try to choose to be righteous and call it faith. The problem is you're choosing yourself when you choose righteousness first. Say it another way, you're choosing to be self-righteous, not to choose faith and let the righteousness flow out of the steps of faith. See, there's a difference. The self-righteous criticizes. The righteous contributes. Self-righteous people criticize because you're not as righteous as I am, because I made myself this way. The righteous contribute because they recognize everything they have is a gift from God. So why wouldn't I return to God or give to someone else? Freely I have received, freely I've given. I've been forgiven much, so why would I withhold? The self-righteous is concerned about doing all the things that appear right. The righteous focus on things that matter to God, whether or not people count them as righteous or not. The self-righteous puts themselves first. The righteous person puts God first. The righteous one will live by his faith. Why? Because you will never become who God wants you to become without faith. You won't. I don't care how self-righteous you are. I don't care how devoted you think you are. You will not become who God wants you to become without faith. You say, how do you know that? The writer in Hebrews said, without faith, it is impossible. Somebody in that chat say, it's impossible. It's impossible to please God. In other words, you can be the most righteous person you know, but if you don't have faith, you are not pleasing to God. Because without faith, it's impossible to please God. The problem is, a lot of us will try to do it in our own power. A lot of us will try to manufacture our own righteousness in and of ourselves. But it's faith that God wants. Because choosing faith precedes being righteous. You know, it takes faith to serve. It takes faith. Praying takes faith. Because I'm not going to lean on my own understanding, but I'm going to trust in God. Giving takes faith. Worshiping takes faith. Believing that God is pleased when I lift up his great name. It takes faith to invite someone. It takes faith to love someone. It takes faith to forgive someone. It's all faith. Why? What's the difference? Because when you're trying to be righteous, you've got some certainties. If I do this, God has to do that. If I do this, then they'll think that. If I do this, then everybody's going to know I'm a good person. But hear me. Faith begins where certainty ends. I'm not talking about some faith as some little feeling and thought that you have on the inside. I'm not talking about faith as some little little feeling in your belly. Some little, oh, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. That's not the faith that I'm talking about. I'm talking about a blue collar faith. I'm talking about the faith that James talked about. That if I see somebody in need, I'm going to help meet that need to the best of my abilities. I'm talking about a faith that'll walk it out. Because faith begins where certainty ends. Which means some of you need to stop waiting till it makes sense to you and have faith in what God has said to do. See, that's faith. Faith takes a step when it doesn't make sense to you. Why? Because it's what God has said to do. Not just because I felt something, but God in his word has said, this is what I want. This is the way people that bear my name live. This is the way people that bear my name treat one another. This is the way people that bear my name are supposed to interact with others. These are the moral standards. These are the priorities of people that bear my name. See, it's never going to make sense to you to forgive them. Oh, you can find a million people that'll tell you to hold that grudge. Be bitter. Man, don't let it go. You know what they said, and you know how they did, and you know how they treated you. It takes faith to forgive them. And so by faith, you forgive. Why? Because the one who's been forgiven much forgives much. That's Jesus. See, you'll never have the time to serve, but by faith you serve. Because serving doesn't make sense. Why would I serve when I could work more hours and make more for myself? Why would I use my talent and gifting when over there they'll pay me for my talent and gifting? Because serving takes faith. It will never make financial sense to faithfully give. But by faith we give. Why? Because God said that it was significant to him. God makes it clear that wherever your treasure is, there your heart is too. And so you cannot tell me I have your heart if you are withholding from me whatever treasure I've entrusted to you. You can't do it. But it takes faith to take that treasure and trust God with it. Believing that somehow when I trust God with what he's asked for, he's going to grab my heart. He's going to bless my life in ways that I can't even fathom from here. Why? Because it takes faith. Following God has said, following his ways, following what the Bible makes clear. Hear me, it makes no sense. But by faith, we love, and we care, and we share, and we let go, and we build, and we help people who will never help us back, and we love people who will never love us back by faith. That is the instruction God gives Habakkuk. In this crazy world that he lived in, where nothing was going like he expected it to go. But by faith, he trusted God. And by faith, he stood his ground. And he waited for God's response. And God gave him some marching orders, and Habakkuk told him, listen, but God, this world is falling apart. And God told him, I'm gonna handle it all, but I'm gonna handle it later. And the book of Habakkuk ends with this beautiful, hopeful praise from Habakkuk. From someone who doesn't see what he hopes to see, but will have faith in God anyway. And today, in this moment, my prayer is that this could be the prayer for all of us. Every person of faith watching. Come on, every person of faith listening to the podcast. Would you allow these beautiful words from Habakkuk to be not just words that you hear, but a message you live out? Listen to what he says. He says, though the fig tree does not bud, and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen and there are no herds in the stalls. What's he saying? God, if it gets so bad that I have nothing to eat, that's what he's saying. He says, yet I will celebrate in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer and enables me to walk on mountain heights. This is the faith we need in today. In a season like we are in this world, in this economy, in this city, in the chaos that is our world. This is the kind of faith we need. Not a faith that says, God, if you show up and bless me, then I'll follow you. But a kind of faith that says, God, if I have nothing to eat, yet I will celebrate you. God, if I burn my last little drops of gas trying to get to your house to celebrate your name, you're going to find me in your house and I will celebrate you. We need a faith like Habakkuk, a faith that says, God, I don't understand what you're doing, but I will stand my ground and trust you anyway. Can I tell you, that's my charge to you today. Trust in God, no matter what you see. You may be seeing out your window good times and good seasons. I'm so glad for you. Take this word to heart and get set on who God is now, so that when difficulty comes, you will be set on who God is. If things are difficult in your world, if chaos and calamity are just par for the course, trust in God. Be like Habakkuk, who every time he opened up his feed, every time he looked out the window, he saw more of what he didn't understand, but yet he trusted in God. How could he do that? Because he really knew God. Not some fake convenient version of God. He trusted in God completely. And today, I want to pray for those of you who want that kind of faith, who want a Habakkuk faith, a faith that says, God, I may not understand what you're doing, but I will be faithful to you. Can you be faithful to God when you're confused by God? Habakkuk could. But the truth is, most people that call themselves Christians today cannot. Because they're persuaded and intoxicated by circumstance and situation. And if the circumstance and situation is not what I want, they can't trust God. That's not a kind of faith that will last. That's not a kind of faith that's needed in this season. You need a kind of faith that says, God, I will trust you even if I ain't got nothing to eat in the pantry. God, I will trust you even if my kids don't honor you. I'm going to keep praying for them and I'm going to keep honoring you. God, I will trust you even if my friends walk out on me. God, I will trust you even if you bless me financially, or even if I have to wonder where my next rent payments come from. God, I will trust you. If you say, I want to trust God like that, maybe you're saying that as a commitment in your faith. You're saved, you're going to heaven, but you recognize your faith has been a little too situational and you want a faith that's solid. Or maybe some of you today are saying, I have never put my faith in God like that. I have never trusted in God and said, God, I'm going to trust you. Whatever goes on in this life, I'm going to trust you because you are my salvation. That's what Habakkuk said. If that's you, I want to pray with you today. Would you, watching right now, listening right now, wherever you are, would you just simply lift your hands to heaven and say, God, today, I trust you. Even though I don't understand all that's going on around me, all that's taking place in me, God, I trust you. I trust you with my past that I don't understand. I trust you with my present that feels overwhelming. And I trust you with my future, whatever comes. I trust you. God, because you are my salvation. I receive my forgiveness from you. My completion is in you. And God, today, I turn my full attention to you. God, today, I put my whole trust in you. And whatever comes, God, help me to follow you by faith. In your precious name, I pray these things. Amen. Amen.